crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell.
On the third day, he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of God, the Father Almighty. From thence he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Christian Church, the communion of the saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
All right, as we have a slide that's going to introduce and tell a little bit about Professor Peter Kupsis, I'd like to have us turn to John chapter 14, if you would. We read a verse. We could read the whole chapter according to what we're about to hear. There's a lot in here, and we're going to be so blessed, but particularly we go verse 6. All right, and let's just look at verse 6 there. Very powerful verse. And how many have committed this verse to memory in some previous time, the early part of your faith? Such a powerful verse. And we can keep this as a heart verse after we especially hear our message today for a long time to come. John 14 and verse 6. And I believe I have it right here. Okay. Verse 6. If we don't have it on the screen, if you have it, I'd like to read out loud. Okay, let's read this together. John 14:6. Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. I want to say Dr. Peter Kupsis. This is a very dear man of God to this church. He helped fill in for Pastor Brandon last summer and has become a friend to Elder Com and Deacon John and many of the folks here recognize him. He is, as our bio may say, on part of our Facebook page and our bulletin board back there, has been part of the Canadian outreach on the campuses, Campus Crusade for Christ. Very, very blessed group. Bill Bright and has been used mightily, and thank you for your service to the campuses, and that's amazing. And also an adjunct professor, as it says, Bible Institute of Los Angeles, Biola. Some of you may recognize that name. That's a very, very prominent school, and to be teaching there is quite a thing as he obtained his master's degree. So we are very, very honored to have him here with us. Stayed over last night, and he's going to be with us again tonight. So afterwards, if you have any comments, questions, answers, possibly we'll be able to go to Starbucks and get a coffee and just sit and talk. Ask questions. How can you prove the Bible? He's willing to answer every question you possibly can imagine. So at this time, Dr. Peter Kupsis, I'd like to introduce. He says, don't call me doctor. I'm a missionary and a heart man for God. So, amen. It's great to have you here.
Anybody on now?
I think so. Sounds good.
Oh. That was me. I'm not sure that this is on.
Let's see.
Here. Off? No, no, it's on. Okay.
Let's see.
But is yours on the microphone? Oh,
That sounds
okay,
good.
good. There we go. Great, great. Yes, I'm not a doctor, but don't have a PhD, but it's nice to be called that, I guess. I was called Pastor Peter yesterday, but I'm not a pastor either. I'm just on staff with you have the same organization in Korea, CCC, so I'm on staff with them. I was in Indonesia a few weeks ago, and I was speaking at some Christian schools there, and there's a lot of Korean students there. So I told them a little story about how I was in Korea here once. I lived in Busan for 7 years and taught at JINJU College. But one time I was in my classroom and I wanted to tell the students to be quiet. So I wanted to say, 조용히 해주세요, right? Be quiet. But I got 조용히 confused with 고양이. So instead I said, 고양이 주세요. And they kept talking, 고양이 주세요. They're still talking, 고양이 주세요. Finally, one of the students said, no, not goyangi, not cat. I was saying, give me a cat. And they said, no, not goyangi. And then I realized, so then I felt so embarrassed. They probably thought this is a crazy Michin 교수님. Hire this guy. Where are we going to get a cat? This isn't a zoo. We're here to learn. Anyway, so I managed to recover. I'd like to tell you a story this morning about a story from India. It's about a king in a palace who had 3 blind men in his palace. And he brought in an elephant. And he asked these 3 blind men to go touch the elephant and tell him what the elephant was like. So one of the blind men went over to the elephant and he touched the ear of the elephant. And he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a leaf. You know, it's kind of flexible and it's flat, a little bit cool." Another blind man, he went over to one of the legs of the elephant and he started feeling the leg, and he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a tree trunk. You know, it's round and smooth and really solid." And the other blind man, he went over to the tail of the elephant and he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a rope. It's kind of flexible, round, a little bit smelly maybe." And so then each of these 3 blind men then went up to the king and they told the king what the elephant is like. And when they realized that they were disagreeing with each other, they started to fight with each other and started to say, "You're wrong and I'm right." And they were doing this for a while. Finally, the king quieted them down and he said, "You know, guys, you all are disagreeing with each other, but what you don't realize is that each of you has part of the truth. And that if you start talking together, instead of disagreeing with each other, you can have a much more complete, full picture of what an elephant is about and what an elephant is like." This story is often given to describe the world's religions. When you look at the world's religions, they seem to be disagreeing with each other about what is true about God and about ultimate reality. And a lot of people will say, look, the religions of the world are like these blind men. Instead of disagreeing with each other, they should start listening to each other and learning from each other. Well, I don't know about you, but when I heard that story, I thought, yeah, there's something really attractive and something that really seems right about this story. So many religions in the world are just disagreeing. Can't they just accept that they all have part of the truth? But here's the problem with that story. Just because you tell that story doesn't mean it's the right way to describe the world's religions. We can tell lots of different stories. I can tell another story about 3 blind men who are in a palace with the king, and an elephant comes in, and again, the king tells the blind men to go touch the elephant. The first blind man, though, he starts going towards the elephant. Along the way, he trips and falls into a sandbox. And he starts feeling the sand, and he thinks the sand is the elephant. So he says, "Oh, an elephant is like sand. It's all made of tiny little balls, tiny, tiny little balls." And then the second blind man, he doesn't even head towards the elephant. He goes into a different direction. And then he stops, and he starts feeling the air. And he says, "Oh, an elephant doesn't feel like anything at all. An elephant just feels like air." And then the third blind man, he actually goes to the elephant. He feels the trunk of the elephant. He feels the tusks, the ears, the head. He feels the legs, the smooth side of the elephant. He feels the tail, the top and the bottom. And then all 3 blind men go up to the king and start describing what the elephant is like. And again, they start disagreeing and fighting with each other. And the king, he's a nice king. He wants to tell each of the blind men, "Look, you all have part of the truth. You should all learn from each other." The truth is that the first 2 blind men didn't even make contact with the elephant. They're just wrong. And it's the third blind man that really has the complete picture of what the elephant is like. So here we have 2 stories. Which of these stories is the right way to think of the world's religions? Well, the truth is you can't answer that question just by telling the story. If you want to answer that question, you have to actually study the world's religions and see what they have to say. Many times when people look at the world's religions, they see common moral teachings. They see one religion talking and saying, "Don't lie," and another religion saying, "Don't kill," and another religion agreeing with that and saying, "Don't be nice to people, don't steal." And they see the religions of the world agreeing on many moral teachings. As a result, they think all the world's religions are basically the same. But the truth is those moral teachings are not what the world's religions are really about. what the world's religions are really about are answers to life's fundamental questions. Questions such as, what is the nature of ultimate reality? Is there a God? And if there is a God, what is God like? Is it just some impersonal force? Is it something like what we hear about in Star Wars, the Force? Or is it a personal being? Is it one person or is it three persons? Or is there no God at all? On the other hand, religions of the world also answer questions like, what is the problem with the world and the solution? Every religion seems to sense that there is something that's not quite right in the world. And they propose different solutions to this problem. They also answer questions about what happens after we die, both individually and collectively. And no two religions answer those questions the same way. And that is why we have different world religions. Judaism says, Orthodox Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism says that there's one God and you worship that one God. Hinduism says there's millions of gods, 330 million gods, and you can worship all of them, or some of them, or just one of them. It doesn't ultimately matter. Hinduism says that there is a soul, or an Atman, in each one of us that gets reincarnated after we die. But the founder of Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama, he specifically denied that. He specifically said there is no soul, no Atman that gets reincarnated. Buddhism says there's reincarnation and that there is no God, or if there is a God, it doesn't even matter. Islam says there's one God and there is no reincarnation. Islam says there was a person called Jesus, but he did not die on the cross and he did not rise again. In the Quran, in Surah 4, it explicitly says this. But Christianity says in the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that the Apostle Paul says if Christ did not die and rise again, then the whole Christian faith is worthless because you are still in your sins. These are not periphery issues. These are the core issues of the different world religions. This is what defines the different world religions. And it's on these issues that we find fundamental contradictions. And because these religions contradict each other, they can't all be true. We might like to say nice things about the different world religions. We might like to say nice things about people who are Buddhists or Muslims that we know around us. We might want to say, look, they're all true, they all have part of the truth. But the fact is, because they contradict each other on their core teachings, they simply can't all be true. At the same time, we can acknowledge as Christians, or as anybody, that they have some things in common, and there are some things in each world religion that we can say are true. Just because their core teachings must be wrong, doesn't mean that everything in the religion must be wrong. When a Buddhist says it's important to be compassionate to other people, I can say as a Christian, amen, I agree with that. If a Muslim says don't steal, both the Buddhist and we can say yes, we agree with that. If the Hindu says it's important to honor your parents, all of us of different world religions can say we agree with that. But just because we can agree on the moral teachings does not mean that all the religions of the world can be true. As a Christian, I can also agree that there are nice people in other religions. Sometimes you hear some Christians talk in a way where they're saying, only Christians are the nice people. If you spend time with people of other religions, you know there's some very nice people out there who don't in any way claim to be Christians. And we can acknowledge that as Christians. There are nice people in other religions. That's a little hard for us as Christians to do, though, because the Bible says that after we die, there's a heaven and there's a hell. And the Bible certainly seems to be saying that some of these nice people in these other religions are not going to heaven because they're not in a right relationship with God. And so there's this place called hell that they're going to. And that's pretty hard to accept. How is it that God can send, a loving and just God can send nice people to this bad place we call hell? As a Christian apologist, as someone who's interested in apologetics, that is reasons for believing that Christianity is true, I've looked at different ways to understand this whole idea, make sense of this. And some of the answers that I find I think are good and some of them are weaker. But here's the thing, in the end, however you answer that issue of nice people and hell, however you think of that, that whole issue is independent from whether all the religions can be true. You see, Christianity could even be totally false. You could think hypothetically, what if Christianity was not true? There was no heaven, there was no hell. Still, it makes no sense to say that all the religions of the world are true. It simply can't be the case because the religions of the world, they contradict each other. There's some other reasons that we have as Christians to say that if Christianity is true, other religions must be false. We've already looked at that verse from the Gospels where Jesus said in John 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. But there's some other reasons from the Scripture that we have too as well. In the Old Testament, we find the God of the Israelites telling the Israelites over and over again, don't worship the gods of the nations around you. The God of the Israelites did not say, those other religions, they're true too. They're worshiping a God that's actually me, and they're just calling me a different name, and it doesn't really matter what you believe because all the religions are valid and they're all true. No, the God of the Israelites told them over and over again, do not worship those false gods. And he was angry at them over and over again when they would disobey him in that respect. In the New Testament, we find Jesus, before he died, in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying to his Father and saying, Lord, if there's any way, let this cup pass from me. In other words, what he was saying is to his Heavenly Father, if there is some other way, Father, for your purpose to be accomplished, without me having to die a torturous death on the cross, let's do it this other way. Jesus is saying, I don't want to die on this cross. Nobody would want to die on a cross unless it was absolutely necessary, and unless it was for some very important reason. But you see, if all the religions are true, if there's many ways that we can get to God, and it doesn't matter which path you take or what you believe, that Jesus was a fool for dying on the cross. He suffered a torturous death that didn't need to happen. Not only that, his Father in heaven is a sick, evil monster. Because only a sick, evil monster would send his Son to die a death that didn't need to be died. Sometimes I make sacrifices for other people because I think it's worth it. I think some greater good will come out of it. You know, I can even envision a situation where maybe I might ask my son to sacrifice his life for other people. But I would only do that under one circumstance. I would only do it if it was absolutely necessary and if it was really worth it. If it was not absolutely necessary, if it was not worth it, I would be an evil father if I asked a son of mine to go and allow himself to be killed. If there are many ways to God, then Jesus did not need to die on the cross. Not only do we have the words of Jesus, but we have the example of the disciples and the apostles in the New Testament. In the book of Acts, we see Stephen being stoned to death. We see the disciples flogged and even killed. According to tradition, church history, the Apostle Peter was crucified upside down. Why did they do this? Why did they suffer so much? Was it because they had some other religion that was the same as all the other religions and it didn't really matter what they believed and they just liked suffering? No, they did it because they believed Jesus' words when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. They knew that it mattered whether you believed in Jesus or not. It wasn't just some other religion. I have a Facebook page called Mars Summit. And a few months ago, or maybe weeks ago, I put a post up on this kind of apologetics Facebook page talking about how the different world religions contradict each other and how they couldn't all be true. And one day I discovered that there was a man called Reverend Roger Woolsey who seemed like a liberal Methodist pastor. And he had actually seen this post and decided to write a response to it. Well, I was actually kind of excited, even though he disagreed. I was kind of excited because something like this had never happened before. So I read what he had to say, and I started dialoguing with him back and forth. And obviously we didn't agree. It seems to me that ultimately he felt I should not say that other people are wrong. But here's what I kept pointing out to him. You're saying that I'm wrong. Why is it that I am doing something wrong or bad when I say someone else is wrong, but it's okay for you to say that I am wrong? One of the last things he told me in this dialogue was this. He said, everyone climbing up the mountain is making progress toward the peak, except for the one who's running around the base of the mountain yelling, your path is wrong. You see, for Reverend Woolsey, the way he thought of the world's religions is like different paths up a mountain, right? You might be on one path, you might call it Christianity, and you're going up and you see yourself going up to the top, and because you don't see any other paths, you think your path is the only path. But if you just step back from the mountain a little bit, look over this other side, you realize there's another path here. Maybe it's getting up to the top faster, or maybe it's taking a different route, maybe it's slower, but it gets up to the top in the end. And then you look over here a little further and you see there's another path, and you see there's many paths that go up to the top of the mountain. And for Reverend Woolsey, all these paths of the different religions, they're all getting up to God or heaven or whatever it might be, but they're just taking different routes to get there. But for him, there's people like me who are running around the base of the mountain saying, your path is wrong. Makes me look kind of silly, right? A little bit like right? A little bit crazy or something like that. Why don't I just get busy going up a path rather than trying to say anybody else is wrong? Well, I hope by now you can think of a potential problem with this story. Just because Reverend Woolsey tells this story doesn't mean it's the right way to think of the world's religions. I could tell a very different story. Imagine there's a mountain, and there's a path going up this mountain. And as you get a pathway, suddenly this path goes into a cave. Inside the cave, there's a dangerous animal, and it eats whoever comes into this cave. And if you look a little different part of the mountain, there's another path. And it goes up, but about 3/4 of the way to the top, it goes around a little bend, and then there's a sheer drop-off, a cliff. And everybody who goes around this bend falls off this cliff and dies. And then there's another path that goes up just a few meters, and it's a dead end. You have to go back down. And if you look around the whole mountain, you find there's only one path that actually gets to the top. So here are two different stories. We can compare these to the world's religions. What is the best way, which of these stories is the best way to think about the world's religions? Well, the truth is you can't decide simply by telling the stories. You have to look at the world's religions. And when you look at them, you find that this idea that all the paths go to top, it doesn't make sense because the world's religions contradict each other. And if there's one thing about reality, it's that it's not filled with contradictions. According to somebody like Reverend Woolsey, my view, though, is arrogant and intolerant. And those are buzzwords. If you're in the English-speaking world enough, especially if you spend time at a university campus in Canada or America, Australia, you hear words like arrogant and intolerant, especially for a Christian who believes Jesus' words. But think about those words for a second. Is it really arrogant to believe that all the religions of the world cannot be true? If you look at the history of the world's religions, you find that a lot of the founders and leaders and missionaries, they suffered a great deal and even died to spread their beliefs. When Muhammad started the religion of Islam in Mecca, he said that the idols that they were worshiping in the Kaaba, in this little stone building, they were false gods and they should not be worshipped. And as a result of that, he faced persecution, him and his followers. So what did they do when they faced that persecution? Did they say, well, our religion is the same as all the other religions, so it's not really worth it for us to be persecuted, so why don't we just change what we believe or just do something else? No, they believed that their religion was somehow different from the religions around them, that it wasn't just the same old thing, that it somehow contradicted the other religions, and it was important that they believed what they believed. So as a result, they fled to Medina to continue their religious beliefs. And this is true not just of Islam. When Buddhism was started by Siddhartha Gautama in India, he walked around the Indian continent in order to spread his beliefs because he understood that Buddhism was not the same thing as Hinduism and that it mattered whether people were Buddhist or not. In the end, he was poisoned and he died. And later on, the Emperor Ashoka sent out missionaries all throughout the Indian subcontinent and that whole surrounding area. Why did those missionaries go out? Was it because they knew that their religion was the same as all the other religions and it didn't matter what you believed? No, it's because they understood that their religion was somehow different. When Mormonism was started by Joseph Smith in the United States, and the Mormons started traveling around to different locations, they faced persecution in these different places. And then eventually, their leader, Joseph Smith, was shot and killed. As a result, a new leader, Brigham Young, took the Mormons on a long and arduous journey across much of the United States at a time when there was no cars or planes. And they went on this long journey to a place that we now call Utah or Salt Lake City. Many of them died on that trip, and it was very difficult. Why did they do that? Was it just because their religion was the same as all the other religions? No, it's because they believed that what they were following, what they were believing, was somehow very different. The founders and leaders of the different world religions did not believe that their religion was the same as all the others. And so, in fact, I don't think it's someone like me who is being arrogant. I really think it's someone like Reverend Woolsey who is really being arrogant. Because what he is essentially saying is that these founders and these leaders of these religions did not know what they really believed. Reverend Woolsey knows it better than them. They were confused. They thought somehow they believed something really different. It was really important. But what they didn't realize is that their religion was the same as all the others. Reverend Woolsey, he's got it figured out. They didn't know what they were doing. If you ask me, that's arrogant. Now, am I being intolerant? Are we intolerant by saying that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life? Here's the thing about tolerance and intolerance. Unless you disagree with someone, you cannot be tolerant. If Reverend Woolsey wants to agree with all the world religions, he cannot be tolerant. Why? Because tolerance first requires disagreement. That's the definition of tolerance. Tolerance means respectful disagreement. Intolerance is disrespectful disagreement. But both tolerance and intolerance first require disagreement. If you don't disagree with someone, you're not tolerant or intolerant. You're in a completely separate category altogether. Only if you disagree can you disagree in a respectful way and therefore be tolerant. The Christian who says Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life can be tolerant if they disagree with people in a loving and respectful way, which is exactly how Jesus called us to live. He called us to speak the truth boldly, but not rudely. Christians are called to be tolerant. And when a Christian is intolerant, that is wrong. But simply by saying Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, that does not make you intolerant. Rabbi Maharaj was born and raised in California. Sorry, not in California, in Trinidad, an area of the world called the Caribbean. And his family, his group, were Hindu. His father was a deeply revered Hindu guru. But when Rabbi was at a very young age, his father died. And then the mantle of guruship, the expectation of leadership, transferred from his father to himself. So at a very young age, people started to look up to him and respect him as a future Hindu leader. So he started to learn about Hinduism at a very young age. He would read the Bhagavad Gita and learn about the great battle of Kurukshetra, where this Hindu god called Krishna had a conversation with Arjuna. And in this conversation, Krishna said essentially that all the religions eventually lead to him. And so Rabbi Maharaj would say, all the religions are valid. They're all good, but not because they're really all true. No, Hinduism had the truth. But they were valid because you could accumulate good karma in those religions. And then after you died, you could be reborn in a better state. And if you were lucky, you would be reborn as a Hindu. And then only as a Hindu would you be able to achieve moksha, this release from all these cycles of reincarnation. And as he grew up, he engaged in intensive meditation. He even described situations where he would say his soul would leave his body, he would go to distant lands and talk with Hindu gods. Sometimes in religious Hindu ceremonies, he would do something called the Shakti Pat, where he would touch these disciples, these followers on the head, and they would have this blinding light and fall back. He had all kinds of reasons to believe that Hinduism was true. And he had all kinds of reasons to follow in his father's footsteps and be a great Hindu leader, a guru. But as a teenager, he became dissatisfied with his Hinduism. He started to sense that there was this fundamental difference between